Welcome, everybody. My name is Mary DeBay, and this is the Zero Waste Chef Cook-Along, which is a Climate Reality Project Bay Area event. I'm very excited to host you today. So hopefully you are able to see on the screen kind of the layout of the event today. So you can see we're going to break up the cooking segment a little bit, and that's by design. So first we're going to do some intros. Maybe we'll talk about a bit about the chapter. We'll talk a little bit about food waste, and then we're going to transition into the kimchi prep. So we're making kimchi today, which is very exciting. And then we're going to flip over, and there's a part educational segment as well. And then we're going to go and finish up the kimchi. And then my very favorite part, we're going to be giving away some prizes at the end, along with our call to action. So that's the plan. So if that sounds good, I'm going to flip this over to Harriet, who will get us kicked off.
Thank you, Mary. It's wonderful to see everybody this evening. I am Harriet Harvey Horn, co-chair along with Bonnie Hamilton of the Climate Reality Bay Area chapter. Per custom, we'll open with a land acknowledgement. With respect, we acknowledge the Ohlone, Miwok, Patwin, and other indigenous peoples whose ancestral lands we currently occupy in the greater San Francisco Bay Area region. This land acknowledgement helps remind us of the historic and ongoing oppression of indigenous people, how the taking and occupying of indigenous lands and the exploitation of indigenous people and those lands is directly connected to the climate crisis, and how building relationships with and following the leadership of indigenous people here and everywhere is crucial as we seek and build long-term solutions to the global climate crisis. First, a little bit about the Climate Reality Project and the Bay Area chapter. The Climate Reality Project is an international nonprofit organization founded and chaired by former US Vice President and Nobel laureate Al Gore. Mr. Gore founded Climate Reality in 2006, shortly after the release of his award-winning documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, with the mission to mobilize a global grassroots network of climate advocates. Today, Climate Reality spans 170 countries with over 40,000 climate reality leaders around the world trained by Mr. Gore to speak truth to power about the climate crisis and its solutions. Ours is one of the earliest and largest regional chapters of the Climate Reality Project. We take its mission to the local level with almost 1,500 members, catalyzing solutions to address the climate crisis and climate justice across 8 counties and the many towns and cities in the Bay Area. Our chapter's activities are anchored in the Climate Reality Project mission to 1, educate and inform the public; 2, to use a climate justice lens for diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in all we do; and 3, to mobilize a grassroots network of climate advocates to take action that will lead us to a cleaner, safer, more prosperous and thriving future. With hundreds of local climate leaders trained by Mr. Gore and hundreds more committed community members, we are a tight-knit team taking urgent action to broadly adopt solutions to the crisis. Our goal is for the Bay Area and California to lead and serve as a compelling model of a regenerative future for the rest of the United States and the world. We invite you to learn more about this and other upcoming events and ways to engage in our work and how to join our chapter by visiting our website at www.climaterealitybayarea.org or follow us on social media. So finally, this event is being recorded and will be available on the Climate Reality Bay Area YouTube channel within the next couple of weeks. So if you missed something during the evening, you can always go back and visit it then. So without further ado, I'll turn the program over to Mary, who I also want to recognize with the deepest gratitude for arranging the event this evening. We're just really excited about it and thank her for her work here. So I'll turn it over to Mary.
Thanks so much for the intro, Harriet. And I wanted to talk just for a minute about, we're going to speak today about reducing waste. And I wanted to talk for just a minute about why that's important. And I know sometimes you get that kind of glazed over look when you talk to people about individual action in terms of climate action. But the truth is that collectively, individual action matters. And that's what we're going to be talking about today and giving some examples, specifically with reducing plastic as well as food waste. And you can see the quote that's from Dr. Jonathan Foley from a Project Drawdown about the importance of this area. And it's something it's actually an area that we have control over. And, just to maybe give an illustration, I was talking a few weeks back at an event, and we were talking specifically about the vegan diet. And I mentioned, the history of Meatless Monday and gave the statistic: if everyone in the US gave up meat and cheese just for one day a week, it would be the equivalent of taking 7.6 million cars off the road. So just to give you an example of what individually we can do and collectively make a very big difference. And with that, I want to introduce our speaker. I'm just so very excited to have her today. It was actually my sister who gave me this book over the Christmas holiday, and it's The Zero Waste Chef, and I just loved it so much. It's filled with great stories and very informative, not to mention great recipes. And I'm new to fermentation and very eager to learn, and I think that our guest is something of a guru in that, among other things. But please welcome Anne-Marie Bono, the Zero Waste Chef. I'm going to turn over to you, and I'm going to head into my kitchen.
Thanks, Mary. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, everyone, for coming. So I'm going to put you to work right away. For anyone who's cooking along, I'd like you to start chopping your Napa cabbage. And I chop it into fairly big pieces. So I did this beforehand, so you wouldn't have to watch me do all kinds of chopping. So before you chop, save a piece. Peel off one piece, set it aside. You'll see at the end why you need that. So here I didn't completely chop mine. All I do is go chop, 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 chop. So really easy. It only takes a few minutes. So I'm just going to finish off chopping my Napa cabbage. And you can use Savoy cabbage. You can use any cabbage, but I really do like it with Napa cabbage. It's a little bit sweet. So I'm going to chop that, put that in there. And let's see, I have a bit left because I'm going to talk about food waste. So you want to make sure I use all of this up. Okay, and then I don't have that much left on there. All right, so there's my Napa cabbage. And you can finish chopping while I give my little talk. So next, I'm going to add the Daikon Radish. Now, this one isn't organic, so I peeled it. Usually I don't bother, but I wanted to for this one. And if you buy yours and you have the greens coming out of the top, save those, cut them up and put them in with the cabbage. You can use every part of the vegetable. Little Japanese white turnips are really good in kimchi. And I have some growing in the backyard, but they're really small. So I'm going to let them grow a bit more. Now my daikon, I cut into like sort of matchsticks. This was a big daikon. So my cabbage was 2 pounds. This one, the daikon was, let's see, my recipe says 1 pound. Oh, if you don't have room on your counter space and you have a music stand, pull it out for cookbooks. All right, I'll show you how I cut this. So I'll cut a big piece and then cut it in half. Cut it in half again. So there, like that. And then I just cut that into little matchsticks. I'm going to put that in my bowl, and my bowl looks like it's going to overflow, but it really shrinks down after maybe half an hour, which is how long my little presentation is going to be. So, all right, I've got my Napa cabbage, my daikon radish. I'm going to add green onions. These I grew outside from ends. So when you have if you're chopping green onions right now, and if you want to, save the ends with the little hairy roots and you can regrow those. You can put them in a little container of water and some green shoots will start to come up. And after you have a little bit of growth, you can go plant them outside. Actually, you don't even think you need a little bit of growth. I didn't do that with my last ones, but usually I'm too busy. So I put them in the water until I get around to it. And so that's where these green onions came from. So I'm chopping those in, well, I think my cookbook says an inch, but really however you like. So there, I did like half an inch. You can also add, right now at the farmer's market, a lot of the onions have the green parts coming out of them. You could use that too. That's a good way to use that up. So here are all my vegetables. I'm now going to add salt. And in my book, I say 1 tablespoon plus 2 teaspoons, which is almost 2 tablespoons. And I have so much daikon in here, I'm just gonna add a couple tablespoons. So you could start with less and then see how it tastes. So there's my salt. And now I'm going to crush this with my hands as I carefully, my bowl looked so big when I pulled it out. Carefully mix this all together. Now, salt does a few things. It tastes really good. It draws out the liquid in the vegetables. So the trick to fermenting vegetables is to make sure everything's submerged in liquid. If you do that, you really can't go wrong. If you have a few vegetables poking out of the liquid, and you'll see this when I pack it, those can turn moldy and you can just scrape them off, throw them out. Or sorry, compost them. Don't throw them out. Crushing this helps break the cell walls, and that helps draw some liquid out. So vegetables are covered in lactic acid bacteria, and when you submerge them in liquid, cut them off of oxygen, they ferment the food. So they consume the carbohydrates in the vegetables, and they emit gases and acids, and you get this really delicious flavor. They are salt tolerant. So if you happen to get some bad bacteria in your ferment, the good bacteria have an edge because they are salt tolerant, and also bad bacteria can't survive in the acidic environment of fermented food. So this is very safe. One of the questions I get frequently is, am I going to accidentally kill my family if I ferment food? And it's actually very safe. So I'm going to keep doing this. And then I'm going to put a weight on my vegetables. There, so the volume's gone down a little bit already on my bowl. But I'm going to put a clean plate on top of my vegetables and then put a jug of water on top and let them sit. You can let them sit for an hour or 2 hours, or you can even let them sit overnight. Just make sure you cover them. Sometimes I'll start fermented vegetables at night, late at night, and then I just get too tired to wait for them to have some liquid pooling in the bottom. So I just drape a towel over everything to protect it, and I just go to bed. And in the morning, finish it off. Okay, so this looks pretty good. On my website, I have a recipe for kimchi, but I add a brine to it instead, which works and it tastes really good, but then you have to pour off all this water. And so for my cookbook, I revised it so that you actually crush the vegetables instead, because I thought, why waste water? We're in California. Well, why waste it anywhere? So I've got my clean plate. It's a little bit small, but it'll work. And there's my weight on the vegetables. I'm going to set these aside. And I'm going to work on the spice mixture. Oh, I should taste it. Let me just make sure I have enough salt.
You did have someone ask in the chat if it matters what kind of salt or what particular kind of
salt. Oh, that's a great question. So this is coarse salt. I've used kosher salt. I've used table salt. Rainbow Grocery in San Francisco, I don't get to as often as I would like. They have great salt up there from the Bay. It's really good. So I've used all types, and I haven't noticed any bad effects. All right, so now I have minced up 6 cloves of garlic and 1-inch piece of ginger is what the recipe called for. I put a little bit extra by accident. Now, if you don't know this trick, actually I didn't peel this ginger, but if you want to peel your ginger, use a spoon and then you remove just the skin. You don't remove a bunch of ginger like you do with a vegetable peeler. So, and this is about 1 inch of ginger. Whoops. Good thing I already have that chopped. All right, so there is my ginger and my garlic. Some of this is organic, and most of it's organic. Fermentation will work if the food isn't organic, unless you make ginger beer, and then you do need organic ginger because the ginger is doing all of the fermentation. If it's not organic, it may have been irradiated. And so there are no good bacteria and yeast on that to do your fermentation. Now I'm going to add these kelp granules, which I often forget to add, and I really just have a smidgen. And let me see, how much do I add? Oh, a teaspoon. Yeah, I have only about a 1/4 teaspoon, but that's okay. These add like a bit of a fishy smell, which is nice. Because traditionally kimchi calls for fermented fish paste. And then the secret ingredient, Gochugaru. This is delicious. I bought this in bulk at Rainbow. Now they call it, I think it might be called Korean spice there. And then it says Gochugaru in small letters. So if you're in San Francisco at Rainbow, it's over by the spices. They have a huge thing of spices. So I put a 1/4 cup of this in my spice mixture. And it's this beautiful, this is what gives kimchi that, putting a little extra in. There has that beautiful color. And then I mix that up. And when my kimchi is ready to pack in a clean jar, I just mix everything together. So it's actually really simple to make. And my cabbage and my Daikon Radish cost $8 total. And this is probably the most expensive, maybe the spice, or maybe not. I probably put $3 worth in there. So let's say this whole thing costs maybe $12, and it's going to make a couple of good sized jars of kimchi. So it's a really good deal. And all right, so I'm just going to let that sit. And now I'm going to, 1/4 cup of Gochugaru. It's in the list, the ingredient list that went out. So it's this Korean spice, which is, it makes kimchi. Now, if you don't have that, you can put in cayenne pepper, but just a little bit. Maybe start with a 1/4 teaspoon. See how that tastes. It's still going to taste really good. It's not going to have the quite have the kimchi magic, but it'll still be good. Okay, now I'm going to move this out of the way and I'm going to give my little presentation. So I'm, let's see, because it's kind of weird for me to see two of myself. I'm going to go over here. And here I am again. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to sit down. All right. So just going to give you some ideas for reducing waste. So I'll tell you a little bit about how this started. Back in 2011, I read about plastic pollution. I had no idea that plastic was swirling around the oceans and that animals were ingesting it and getting tangled up in it. And, you know, it's really upsetting. And so I told my older daughter at the time, she was 16, I said, we have to get off of plastic. This is terrible. I don't want to be a part of this. And she said, okay, great. But on our first trip to the grocery store, I saw plastic everywhere because it is everywhere. And I had no idea where to start. And I remember throwing my hands up in the air in the bathroom tissue aisle. And I said to Mary Catherine, this is impossible. We're never going to be able to do this. So she did a bunch of research and figured out what we needed to do. And the first thing she did was an audit. So every week she would collect our plastic and we would figure out, okay, what's an easy switch that we can make? And, you know, plastic doesn't just pollute when you throw it out. It pollutes all along its life cycle, from extraction of fossil fuels to refining them, to transporting them, you know, to finally using them and disposing of them. And big oil's investing hundreds of billions of dollars into hundreds of millions. Anyway, a lot of money into building way more plastic plants because they want to do something with their fossil fuels. So we figured out what to do. And this is months later. You know, it took a long time for us to purge the plastic. Charlotte, my younger daughter, was only 10 at the time. So I bought her some lunchbox for her lunches. I didn't want her to take glass jars to school for lunch. I did that for work back when we had an office to go to. We started buying milk in returnable, refillable glass bottles and started drinking less milk. I buy all my produce at the farmer's market now. So for fruit, I'll buy lots of it, prep it, freeze it, put it on a cookie sheet so that I don't just get a clump of strawberries. When they're frozen, I put them in jars and put those back in the freezer. So that's my replacement for plastic bags of frozen fruit. Bar soap, I actually don't remember buying liquid soap ever, but if you do, it's an easy switch. And when you buy liquid soap, you're paying for water. So bar soap is concentrated. I have some bulk stuff in the middle, and on the bottom right, that's my fermented scrap vinegar. Vinegar was like the holy grail. So by paying attention to the plastic, I became aware of all types of waste. And then I learned that we throw out a lot of food that we produce. In the US, up to 40% of the food we produce goes uneaten. And worldwide, it's about a third. So that food waste is responsible for from 8 to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. And to put that into perspective, the aviation industry accounts for about 2.5%. So when the food goes uneaten, not only are we wasting the food, but all of the resources that went into producing the food. So the water, the energy, the land that is cleared of trees to grow food that goes uneaten, the labor, all of the inputs into the soil. And when that food ends up in landfill, it's compacted and anaerobic bacteria break it down and they release methane gas, which is a greenhouse gas much more potent than carbon dioxide, which I don't need to tell this audience. So if you want to cut your waste, the great place to start is with shopping. Even if you're a hardcore minimalist who owns 12 items you can fit in a backpack, you still have to eat. And if you cut food waste, you also cut plastic waste, because chances are you're buying some of your food in plastic packaging, because there's so much of it at the grocery store. And so you reduce that too. So we're going to talk about where to shop, what to buy, and how to buy it. So where to shop? There is a wonderful place to shop near you that is super economical and you don't have far to go. And that is your refrigerator. So before you go shopping, look at what you have on hand. Usually, if we were taught to cook, we were told, look up a recipe that tastes good, that I think will taste good, jot down the ingredients, go to the store, buy the ingredients, bring them home, make the dish, put all the little bits and pieces left over from prepping the dish in the fridge, along with any leftovers. And if you do that a few nights a week, you have all kinds of food in your fridge, and you'll have all these little bits and pieces of things, and chances are some of that's going to go to waste. So instead, let the contents of your refrigerator dictate what you're going to cook next. It's kind of like that show Chopped, where they hand you a basket of really strange ingredients. Well, there's like one strange ingredient in the basket, and they say, okay, go make a 3-course meal. You have 20 minutes. But you don't have mean judges or a timer when you do this yourself at home. So check the refrigerator for the most perishable stuff that you need to eat quickly. Look at what produce you have on hand. Do you have anything out in the garden that you could use? This is a rogue kabocha squash from the compost bin. That's my lemon tree. I freeze all kinds of food. So next, look in the freezer. I have some tofu in there right now. That's in the top row, the third larger jar. And I have some overly ripe kimchi. So I'm going to make kimchi stew with that. So you chop some onion and you throw in the kimchi and some vegetable broth and the tofu. And if you have any leftover okara from making the tofu, which is soybean pulp, you can throw that in. Anyway, it's really good. I freeze a lot of tomatoes in the summer, end of summer, when the tomato prices go down. I buy at least a couple of cases, 20-pound cases of early girl tomatoes, the small dry farmed ones. And I cut them up, roast them at a really low temperature, sometimes with smashed garlic. And then I put them in jars, wide mouth jars, so that there's no neck to break off. And I leave a couple of inches of headspace. And that is my solution to tomatoes. And they're absolutely delicious. So I spend one day chopping a lot of tomatoes and I think, oh, why am I doing this? But then I taste them and say, oh, okay, that's why I did this. It's actually a good deal too. After you check the refrigerator and freezer, look in the pantry. Maybe you have some mystery grains that need to be used up. I have a recipe in my cookbook for dosa. So that's great if you have a small amount of rice. You soak the rice and lentils, and then you grind them up into a paste and add water, and they ferment, and you spread them out like crepes and bake or fry them. Really yummy. Mystery grains are also good for soup. If you have a 1/4 cup of rice, you probably don't want to heat up a 1/4 cup of rice and 1/2 cup of water and cook it for 20 minutes for such a small amount. So just throw it in the soup. After you have shopped your refrigerator and pantry and your kitchen, then head out grocery shopping. So I religiously shop at the farmer's market. The food is delicious, and also, well, it's local, and about 90 cents of your dollar goes to the farmer. And when you shop at a mainstream grocery store, about 15 cents goes to the farmer. So I know one farmer at the farmer's market told me that the farmer's market saved his family farm. And then I go to the bulk store and get what dry goods I need. All right, what to buy? So that depends on what you found when you did your inventory. So what can you make with what's on hand? Start to think about that when you're doing your inventory. Do you need anything else to make it? Maybe you need some celery or an onion, or I don't know, some spice or something. So plan one or two more meals if you like. I call this meal planning light. If you prefer to crack out a spreadsheet and know everything you're going to eat for the month, then do that. This is just how I like to do it. Try to think of what you can do with any leftover ingredients. So let's say you're making a stir fry and you cook some rice. Maybe you can cook a bunch of extra rice, and then the next day or the day after that, have fried rice or make rice pudding. So I always try to have something prepped and ready to go. And then I don't feel like I'm starting from scratch every time I cook. Also, I don't cook something new every night because I don't have time for that. Then make your shopping list. We eat a lot more vegetables now, a lot more fresh produce. And about 2 weeks after I cut the plastic, I realized, oh, I've stopped eating highly processed food, because that's the stuff that comes in all the shiny plastic packaging. This stuff all has its own packaging, and it tastes so good. These are some bulk things I talked about. So I have flour. Popcorn is a zero waste food group. We eat lots of popcorn. And I have some bulk bagels. And on the right, some bread. At some bakeries, you can take a cloth bag and put your bread in it and avoid the plastic. Chickpeas are another zero waste food group. We eat a lot of them. And when I cook them in my pressure cooker, which is really fast, and I use an induction, I have an induction cooktop that I can show you after when we get back to the kimchi. Not that you need to cook the kimchi, but I'm just kind of obsessed with my induction cooker. I love it. And when I have that and my pressure cooker, it's so energy efficient. Plus, our house is 100% renewable energy. So chickpeas are delicious. I'll cook a big vat of them, and I might make chana masala with some of them, and I might make hummus with some more. And if I have a little bit left, maybe I'll roast them, make roasted chickpeas. These are my spices. So I like to buy these up. Well, I'm like, buy everything I can in bulk. We're lucky because we have good bulk stores around here. When you buy spices, in bulk, you can just get small amounts. So your spices are always fresh. How to buy it. These are cloth produce bags that some friends and I, we sew out of donated fabric, sheets and scraps of fabric that people don't want that might end up in landfill. So we take those. We don't buy any new fabric, so no virgin fabric. And we sew these really simple cloth produce bags, and we give them away at the farmer's market in Sunnyvale. And this is a woman coming back with bags she had picked up at a previous giveaway, and she's got her produce in them. And when we give these away, we're not just helping people cut their plastic down at the farmer's market, but people start to talk about plastic, and they say, I didn't realize that there was an alternative. I hear that all the time. We can talk about how, plastic's made of oil. And, I just see like the light bulbs going off. So this is a stack of 500. I think we've given away about 3,200 so far. COVID really slowed us down. But also the produce kind of stays, that's like not the nicest picture of me. Anyway, the produce stays fresher, I think, in the cloth produce bags. This is one thing I love to do that cuts down on food waste. When you buy greens, if you don't use them right away, you put them in the crisper, you open them 2 days later, and they're all wilted in there. Even if they were super fresh when you bought them, that often happens. So when I bring them home, I cut them into, fairly big pieces, kind of like the kimchi size pieces maybe, or bigger, doesn't matter. Anyway, cut them, wash them, and then I put them back in a cloth bag, and then I go outside and I spin it around, and that wicks away the water. That's my salad spinner. And then I take that and I put it in the drawer of the refrigerator, the crisper, and it stays fresh for a really long time. So storing the food for optimal freshness really helps. Asparagus season should be ending pretty soon. I did see some at the farmer's market last week. When you buy asparagus, just put it in a jar of water and it stays fresh for a really long time and it looks nice. And these are my green onions that I mentioned. They're regrowing, and then you can put them in a pot. You could grow them in a sunny window, or you can put them outside or put them directly in the soil. Keep potatoes and onions away from each other. They give off gases that cause each other to break down. Keep tomatoes out of the refrigerator. They get kind of mealy and tasteless in the refrigerator. If you have avocados that you want to ripen, put them in a bowl of fruit. If you don't want them to ripen, keep them away from the fruit. Fruit gives off ethylene gas and it causes the fruit to ripen faster. So those are some tips for keeping your food fresher. Cooking like grandma. This is what I do. So freestyle cooking, I'll talk about that, fermentation and sourdough bread. Freestyle cooking is kind of what I was talking about at the beginning, where you see things in the fridge and think, okay, what can I make with that? So this is the making of ratatouille. The tomatoes are not shown. If you have a lot of vegetables, cut them into bite-sized pieces, toss them in olive oil and salt and some herbs, maybe some fresh rosemary and some garlic. I do different vegetables in different pans because they roast at different times. And then you have delicious roasted vegetables, which you can eat as is, or you can throw them into a frittata or, into a pita bread with some other stuff, with some hummus. You can make a galette with them. You can blend them with some broth and have really delicious soup, because when you roast them, it intensifies the flavor and it tastes really good. This is some of my homemade pasta. I cook whole sugar pie pumpkins in my pressure cooker at Thanksgiving, and I use the puree to make pies and also pumpkin bread and all the pumpkin things. I had some left over, so I made some pasta with it. It was really good. And then pesto. You can make pesto out of all the things. This is fennel frond pesto. And behind, you can see I'm roasting the fennel bulb and the stalks. And then with the fronds, I made pesto. I added parsley. And this one, I'm not sure if it has cheese or nutritional yeast, either one. Olive oil, some nuts. I use walnuts. I love pine nuts, but they're so expensive. So I use walnuts. This is my homemade tofu. For me, the hardest part about making tofu is figuring out what to do with the leftover soybean pulp. And you can put some into kimchi stew that I mentioned earlier. It tastes really good. You can throw it into granola. That's a really quick way to use up. If you make any nut milk or seed milk or soy milk, you can use that pulp in granola and it tastes really good. It adds a nutty, grainy texture. Or you can make biscotti. This is my homemade biscotti. I drink a lot of tea, and biscotti is a real treat. Okay, fermentation. So, I talked a little bit about that while I was prepping the kimchi. Fermentation prevents food waste. Those lemons on the counter, if I had just left them, eventually they would have gone soft and furry, and I would have had to have composted them. If you make preserved lemons, like on the right here, those will keep for at least a year in the refrigerator. I have some in the refrigerator right now that I made well over a year ago, and they're still fine. This is the kimchi that I started on the left, and same thing. If I bought my Napa cabbage and my daikon, did nothing with it, it would just become food waste. If I preserve it through fermentation, not only am I saving the food, but it tastes really, really good. And it's gut friendly. It's filled with beneficial bacteria. And there's have been so many studies coming out over the last several years showing that our gut is connected to everything. Our gut health affects our overall health, our weight, our mood, and it's really fascinating. But it's maybe most importantly delicious. Sourdough. So I've been making sourdough since before everybody started making sourdough. My starter, her name's Eleanor. She turned 8 years old this year. We had a little party for her. I gave a free sourdough starter workshop. So sourdough starter is wild yeast. And this is why everybody started making sourdough. Well, one reason, during COVID, they couldn't find yeast. And on Instagram, I kept getting all of these pictures. All these people were tagging me with their new sourdough starters, and I didn't know what was going on because I didn't realize there was no yeast in the stores. And then it dawned on me, oh, okay, this is what's going on. And this is the bread that contains flour, water, and salt. That's it, because the starter on the left is just flour and water. So every time I pull a loaf out of the oven, I'm still amazed, you know, that this is what I get from 3 ingredients, 1, which is from the tap. I also have a grain mill, and this is my manual grain mill. I also have an electric one that a friend gave me a few years ago. And when you grind up your own flour, you preserve all those nutrients. So the store-bought stuff, which I mostly use, because if I ground everything up, my loaves would be really dense. They'd be too heavy. But the store-bought stuff has all of those, a lot of the nutrients stripped out of it. That's why it's shelf stable. Because once you grind up wheat grains, the oils are released and they start to turn rancid. So you have to use it quickly. If I don't use it right away, I'll put it in the fridge or in the freezer. And it tastes really, really good. When I grind my own flour, my kids can tell. They can say that they've said, "What, like, these crackers are really good. What did you do with this batch?" Okay, but you don't have to go all little red hen if you want to cut your waste. You don't have to plant the wheat, to grow the grain, to harvest it, to grind it up, to make the flour, to bake bread. You can just buy bread. Composting. Composting is super important. It's not a get out of jail free card for food waste. Ideally, we eat all the food we buy. Kind of like recycling. Recycling is a last resort. So with compost, you want to eat all the food you buy, but you know, food waste happens. You just buy too much food, or you go out for dinner, or you know, your office brings in lunch, and you know, your plans get thrown off, and so food waste happens. If you have chickens, feed your food scraps to your chickens. This is one of my favorite pictures. My daughter, Mary Catherine, sent it. She was working on a farm at the beginning of COVID in Canada, and these are the eggs that the chickens made with the food scraps. Those are some food scraps I put in my bin, and this is the finished soil. My soil is like clay, so I need all the scraps I can get. There's an app. If you don't have a compost bin and you don't have a way to compost, there's an app called Share Waste. It's kind of like Tinder for food scraps. So if you're looking for an eligible bin for your food scraps, you can look at Share Waste. It's in the app, so you can download it on your phone. And if you have a bin and you want more scraps, you can look for someone who wants to donate their scraps. And I've been on the Share Waste map for a few years, I think, and have never really had anyone contact me. And now I have, because of the new law that went into effect in California, everybody has to separate their food scraps. I have 3 people coming regularly now. So that's great, because our soil really needs it. Okay, so why bother? Why not just be like my daughter early on, Charlotte, when she was younger? Why not just live like a normal person? So there is the short answer. Okay, but what's in it for me, you may be asking? Taste your food. The food I eat now, it tastes so much better. I can't go back, even if I wanted to. These are my sourdough crackers on the left. So when you feed your starter, every day you remove most of your starter and then you put in fresh flour and water. And so you have this discard and it gets really, really tangy over time. So I make crackers out of it. I make pancakes, pizza, all kinds of things. But the crackers, they have a cheesy flavor. They don't contain cheese. They just taste cheesy because of the really tangy starter. These are my roasted chickpeas. And, you know, if I want a snack now, I'll have like an apple or an orange, or if I have crackers, you know, have some crackers. But so I eat less snacky type things than I used to, which I think is good. Healthy gut. So I talked about fermentation, how it's good for your gut, and eating a lot of fiber plus fermented foods is even better. Oh, I saved money. This is my homemade vegetable broth, which I forgot to tell you at the beginning. When you're chopping vegetables, maybe the kimchi, you probably won't have many scraps, but I saved the skins from the garlic, and I add these little scraps to my jars in the freezer. And then when I have enough, so my jars have, you know, carrot bits and celery bits and onion bits and these little garlic skins, maybe tomato cores and ends of green onions, or sorry, green beans. When I need broth, I'll pull a jar of scraps out and I'll simmer them in water, strain them, and I have free vegetable broth. And it's delicious. I know what goes into it. There's no Tetra Pak to throw out. And if I sometimes I'll use it right away. If I have some left over, I can just freeze it or just make it and freeze it. I do that too. So I tell people it's a package deal. So some things I buy are more expensive, like eggs. I'm happy to pay way more for eggs at the farmer's market because I know the hens are treated well, but then I save money, you know, by not throwing out anything and wearing secondhand stuff and buying secondhand things when I need things. Sitting on a chair right now that I found on the curb, and I love it. It's comfortable and it's the right height for this table. So the average American family of 4 spends $1,800 a year on food they don't eat. So if you don't, you know, if you eat the food you buy, you save a small fortune. But the best reason of all, rebel status. So I was on the front page of the Mercury. This was a few years ago. Wow, going on 4 years now. And, you know, I knew I was going to be, there was going to be a story about me because the reporter came over and the photographer. So, but I didn't know when it was going to be in the paper. And one morning a friend texted me and she said, great, right up in the Mercury. And she sent me the link and I read it and I said, oh, you know, I texted her back, yeah, that's a good story, you know, thanks. And then I went about my business, and later in the afternoon, I thought, oh, I wonder if it's in the print edition. So I went over to the grocery store and I had this same shirt on, and I was wandering around looking for the papers, and I saw a stack of them, and I saw I was on the front page above the fold, and I gasped, and I just stood there with my hands over my mouth, just kind of in shock. Had no idea, you know, I didn't even know if it would be in the print edition, and there I was on the front page. So it freaked me out a little bit. And I grabbed my paper and I went up to the cashier, and there was a woman in front of me. I put my paper down on the conveyor belt and she turned to look, and she saw my paper and she took her hand and she swatted the paper. She said, that woman, she's so extreme. And I just looked at her, you know, like gasped again, hands up to my mouth. And she said, I commend her. I read the whole article and I commend her, but she's so extreme. And I just stood there in shock. And finally she looked at me and she said, oh, is that you? And I'm extreme because I eat a lot of vegetables. I don't buy stuff I don't need. And I ride my bike a lot. And now that makes front page news. Okay, so if I've convinced you to cut down on your waste, and you're thinking, I don't want to have to grind up my own flour and make my own bread. I'm not doing all that. I'm thinking, let's say there are 10,000 of you listening to my talk right now. I figure maybe 1% will say, I'm going all in. I'm going to cut all the things. Oh, by the way, it took us months and months to cut all the plastic. Anyway, let's say 1% of you decide you're going to cut everything. The average, let's see, 4.5 pounds of waste is produced every day for each American. Now that, when I made this chart, that was 4.5 pounds, but I heard it's even higher now. It's like more like 4.9. Anyway, we're going to stick with 4.5. So over a year, if 1% of you cut all your waste, that's 160,000 pounds kept out of the waste stream. Now let's say a quarter of you decide you're going to cut a quarter of your waste. That sounds more doable. Well, that works out to about 1 million pounds of waste kept out of the waste stream. Now let's say everyone says, I'm going to cut 10%, which doesn't sound like very much, but everybody doing a little bit adds up to way more. It's 1.6 million pounds of trash kept out of the waste stream. And the thing is, you're probably not going to stop at 10%. I don't think anybody says, I want to cut plastic, I'm cutting straws, I'm done. It's more of a gateway. And oh, and that's it. And that's my book, which is a prize. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to check on my kimchi. So I have to go back to the other, here, I have to go back up here. Ah, there I am again. I'm curious if anybody is cooking along with me. So let's check see how watery this is. It's much more limp now. Oh, thanks, Alice. So it's you know, there's some water. Oh, look at all the water. I don't know if you can see, but look at all the liquid pooling in there. It's a lot. So, you know, usually I might let that sit a little bit longer, but I want to move on and finish up. But yeah, it looks good. So now all I'm going to do is finish up, which is really quick. I'm going to add my spice mixture to this. This is going to be kind of spicy, but actually I still have some daikon later on. After we're all done here, I'm going to throw the extra daikon in here. So I'm just going to mix that all up, and it's going to have that really nice red color to it. And I'm going to pack this in clean jars. Now you don't have to sterilize your jar. You just have to use a clean jar, use soap and water to wash it. If I sterilize this, well, there, bacteria are back in there. So you don't have to do it. And as I said, fermentation is so safe, and you create this acidic environment, and it's going to kill any bad bacteria. Even botulinum spores can't survive in fermented food. So it's super safe. So now I'm going to put some in my jar. If you have some sort of pounder or even like a wooden spoon to kind of pack it in there, I'm just going to use my hand. But if you don't ever do that, if you have jalapenos in there, because you'll burn your hand. So I'm going to, actually, you know what? I'm just going to grab it by the handful. I've never burnt myself doing this, so, but anyway, you can get these beautiful pounders, wooden pounders. Shuami, that's a website that sells them. I did a sauerkraut fundraiser for Ukraine back in end of March, and Shuami donated a prize, and it was one of those really beautiful wooden pounders, and a Le Parfait jar and a Shuami attachment. So, all right, I'm gonna put some more in there. Maybe I shouldn't be using my hand, because I think I say in the book, don't use your hand, and here I am using my hand. Let's see. All right, I'm gonna pour some of the liquid in here. I'm gonna need another jar, but I'm just gonna show you how to do one jar. You don't need to see me do more than that. So I'm putting a bunch of the liquid. Does anybody have any questions about fermenting? It's pretty simple. You pack food in a jar and wait. So I'm going to use the bottom of this jar to just pack it down. You can see it's starting to get compact. This is going to make 2 big jars of kimchi for, I'd say, yeah, like 12 bucks. And in the store, you'd get maybe a quarter as much or a third. But you know, if you don't want to make it, it's worth it to buy it because it is probiotic. It's gut healthy. If you buy it in the refrigerator section. The stuff in the aisles, that is not fermented food. It's you know, it's been pasteurized. It doesn't have live cultures. Okay, I'm gonna put maybe 1 more spoonful in here. That might actually be too much. So I'm leaving quite a bit of space. And then I'm going to take this, fold it, and put it in my jar. And then that's going to help. That will help keep everything submerged, all the little bits. And usually I have a bit more liquid than this. Oh, there's still some cooling in the bowl. So let me add that. The longer I let it sit, I would have had more. But this is pretty good after only half an hour. Okay, then I like this jar in the jar trick. So like I said, the most important part is to make sure all of the food is submerged. And usually or often, just the cabbage leaf will really help, but it might not be completely submerged. So you have to keep an eye on it, maybe stuff it down every day or put the jar in the jar. This is an old yogurt jar. So I put that in there. Here, let me move this so hopefully you can see what I'm doing. So when I put this jar in there, you can see the liquid rises up. So I put that in there and I'm going to close it. You don't want to force it. You don't want the small jar to break. And you know what? I don't quite have enough, so I'm just going to add a little bit of water. You can do that. A little bit of water is fine. There. You don't want to add a ton of water because that will dilute it, but you know, a little bit is okay. And okay, there we go. Well, I still have some poking up. Here, I do it like that. It looks like I don't. And I'll show you some sauerkraut from, this is a couple of months ago. Now, kimchi, you only want to let it sit on the counter for about 3 days because it's soft, the cabbage is soft, and you want it to stay crunchy. So only ferment it for about 3 days. On day 3, taste it. If you like the flavor, it's done. This is very similar sauerkraut, except it's just plain cabbage and salt. And I don't think I even put spices in this, but it's the same method. So this, there we go. So I can take out my jar within the jar. And I have my cabbage leaf on top that was helping keep everything submerged. And it smells really good. And now I'll, because this is ready, I'll put this in the refrigerator. And in a few days, I'll put the kimchi in the refrigerator. While it's fermenting, while the fermentation is active there, I mean, I didn't show you this jar was nice and submerged. There. See how the liquid is covering everything? This is a better example. Anyway, yeah, put that in the fridge. I will keep in the fridge for at least a year. I try to eat a little bit of fermented food every day, and my gut loves me for it. And I think that's it.
All right, Anne Marie, I was just looking, there's a lot of comments in the chat and a couple of questions too. Look at the most recent one here is, do you keep the cabbage leaf in when you move it to the fridge?
You can. I eat it. Eventually I eat it. So,
Okay.
But you can take the jar out. So, during active fermentation, when it's out on the counter, you want everything submerged. But once it's done, and it's done with sauerkraut, it's done when you like the flavor. So it could be 3 days, it could be 2 months. This has been going for 2 months. So it's going to be really strong. Anyway, you can take the jar out at that point once you put it in the fridge, because once you put it in the refrigerator, it doesn't completely stop the fermentation, but it slows it way down. And so you don't have to worry about it going mushy or moldy. So take the jar out and eat that top piece of cabbage. You can cut it up if you want. You could put it on a sandwich. That'd be really good.
There is another question as well. You had mentioned this wooden presser, and somebody was just asking, how do you spell the company to order it?
It's CHOUAMI.
Okay.
So Chouami. Chou is French for cabbage.
Ah, okay.
I have a rest. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, just a couple more. We'll just take a couple more. I think there was going back to your sourdough bread discussion. Somebody was asking if you need to use bread flour or can you use general flour with sourdough?
I usually just use regular flour. Yeah, I use all-purpose and whole wheat. So my sourdough is mostly whole wheat. It rises up really nicely if you use more all-purpose. Like I get the big holes but I like to put more whole wheat. Mine is about 60% whole wheat, 20% rye or spelt, and 20% all-purpose. Sometimes I get that down to more like 15%. But so yeah, just regular flour. You can use bread flour, and I have. I think during COVID, maybe I couldn't find it. I'm not sure. I don't know if you can see, but my grain mill's right. My big one's right back there. I love it.
And maybe we'll just do one more. Somebody just popped this question in the chat. Is it okay to make the preparation in a metallic bowl?
Yeah, it's fine. I did. I mean, I wouldn't ferment it in here. Although stainless steel is supposed to be okay, but it's fine. I've done it for years. Yeah, people will say stuff like, "Oh, when you taste your kombucha, never put a metal straw in it." I mean, it's in there for a split second. It's fine. I use a metal spoon when I stir up my starter. Yeah.
All right, perfect.
I wouldn't use aluminum or copper because that might react, but yeah, stainless steel is fine.
All right, very good. Well, with that, I think we're going to wrap up. I know we talked about giving some prizes away, and I'm actually going to change this up. We were going to do a random number drawing, but then as I was chopping, by the way, I'm a slow chopper, so I was chopping during your whole presentation, and I just finished. So
good.
It took me a while, but I got caught up. So I think we're going to do instead is just ask a couple of questions. Let me just do a quick share screen here. 1 second. All right, is it popping up?
Yep.
Right, very good. I've even got the book open here. So we will be giving away a copy of Anne Marie's book. And so Carolyn, if you can help me watch in the chat, I want to make sure, or Harriet, what I'm going to do is ask a question, and then the first person who gets it right will be our winners. So we're going to have 2 winners tonight of the book. So the first question is, what is the name of Anne Marie's starter? She gave her sourdough starter a name. Does anybody remember what it is? Oh, the first one I saw is Ashley.
Wow.
Ashley
Oh,
Raza.
Oh,
The
There's
answer
so
is
many-
Eleanor. So
so many
Ashley.
people
Oh.
got it right.
impressive
Eleanor's-
memories here.
Yeah. I thought
These
wow,
people
that's
must be eating fermented foods.
Yeah.
So Ashley,
So-
that was the first question. You were our first winner. I'll get with you offline and get you a copy, however makes sense, electronic or whatnot. Next one is Anne Marie shared the story. I was laughing in my kitchen on mute about somebody calling you extreme. And this was right after you were featured in a newspaper. And so my question, let me just go ahead and get the chat ready here, is what newspaper was it? Oh, I think the
There we
first one
go.
she is
That would
Amy.
be
Amy Lovejoy.
Sarah. I think it's Sarah.
Oh, did I miss? Did I miss?
Well,
It's so hard to see. They're flashing over.
The people have answered before the question was asked. So even with Eleanor looking up, it was Amanda who said Eleanor first. So it's a little bit confusing. I don't know. People look like they had the questions before.
That's because I put it up on the screen.
Okay. Oh,
I'll tell you what.
they answered already.
I'll tell you what, I'm giving it away. So we're using my rules. So the first person I saw after I asked the question that popped it in the chat. And so Ashley Raza and Amy Lovejoy, you are the winners of the Zero Waste Chef book. All right. That was a lot of fun. With
maybe
that,
put your
yeah.
emails in the chat for follow-up. for
perfect.
the,
All right,
Great
and so
effort.
with that, we close out just with a couple of calls to action here first. If you're here in the Bay Area, join the chapter. I've got the website up there. We popped it in the chat earlier. I tested out the QR code, so it works. Join us. Join in on some of the events. I thought this is a lot of fun tonight. And of course, follow Anne Marie. So that's how I started getting involved in the community that she's created. In addition to being an author, she is also a blogger. She is great at posting things online. So follow her on LinkedIn. And then the last thing is just reduce the food waste. I started doing it. I started looking in my trash can and it became very obvious to me as I started to think about, well, what is in here and what can I get rid of? So it was things like individual, cake cups, those are gone. Actually, I now I do it myself. And actually, Anne Marie, I take the coffee grounds and I put it in the hydrangeas. I just found out that they really like the coffee grounds.
Yeah.
I know you're a gardener
Roses
too. We've got that in
too.
common. Absolutely. So yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for joining tonight. This was great. Thank you so much, Anne Marie. It is
Yeah.
always
Oh,
such a
thank you.
delight talking to you. I always learn a lot. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to let my vegetables sit for a while. I was just noticing in the book.
Yep.
Let it get a little more
Yeah.
watery.
Yeah.
All right. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks so much for joining.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Thanks, Mary.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. It was fun.
Take care.